Hello and welcome to the Better Places podcast, where we explore the people, projects and politics shaping London's built environment. I'm your host, Siddo, Dwyer, an account director at Concilio, and today we've got a brilliant conversation lined up that touches right at the heart of how London can meet its housing, transport and sustainability challenges all at once. I'm joined today by two people at the heart and centre of this mission. First, Graeme Craig, Director and Chief Executive of Places for London. Graeme leads the team transforming London's Transport for London's property portfolio to deliver tens of thousands of new homes, half of which will be affordable. Welcome, Graeme.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Graeme spent much of his career at the top of TfL and now steers one of London's most exciting public land and development programmes. Alongside him is Mark Walker, Strategic Engagement Lead at Places for London. Mark joined after an impressive career working within the Labour Party with Tom Watson, the former deputy leader of the party, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, and in senior political organising roles across London. Welcome, Mark.
Good to see you.
He brings an unrivaled experience in navigating local politics and community consultation, which is crucial to winning trust and delivering projects across our capital city. Today, we're going to explore Places for London's approach to unlocking land around stations to build new communities. We'll look at some of the big schemes at Bollo Lane, Cockfosters and Arnos Grove, from which I'm familiar, up in Enfield, and how they work within boroughs, with Network Rail and communities, and how they, that's Places for London, balance the need for social value with the challenge of generating revenue to fund our sprawling city's transport network. So I've packed this episode, but hopefully it won't be too long, with some insights for anyone working within development politics, public engagement in London. So I guess let's get started, guys. And thank you so much for joining us. And we're here in Whitechapel in a quite a nice eerie type studio, but it will be hopefully quite fun and casual chat. But I'd really like to start with you, Graeme. So Places for London is still relatively a new entity with an ambitious set of goals. I wonder if you could start by explaining your overall vision for Places for London, what role it plays with the Mayor's broader strategic vision, and why it's different from TfL's previous property ventures.
Sure. It's probably helpful if I go back to the beginning briefly. I mean, when I first came into property in TfL, TfL was absolutely clear that it was a transport organisation, didn't know what it owned, didn't value what it had, didn't have a housing programme, really didn't see itself as being a property company.
I mean, it's one of the biggest landlords in the country, right?
In London, yes, one of the largest, not the largest, but one of the largest. It owns 5,500 acres of land. And of course, the first message to get across then is, well, if you own 5,500 acres of land, you're a property company, whether you accept it or not. Now, you compare that with where we are now. So we've been Places for London now for 18 months. So a brand that's aligned to TfL but separate, distinct. And Places for London was, as it happens, the first name that we came up with when we're thinking about a brand. We, of course, had to then consider 200 others. But we came back to where we started because it describes what we're here for. We're interested in places, and we're doing it not just in London, but for London. London has many challenges, and of course, first and foremost amongst those is the lack of affordable housing. And as long as we within this entity remember that we're here to serve TfL, we're here to serve London, then we're not going to go far wrong. Also, for the last 3 years, we've been financially separate from TfL. So we now take no funding from TfL, no operating revenue from TfL, no capital from TfL. So all the money that TfL's got, it can invest in the transport network. Our job is to work with commercial funders, commercial partners, to bring forward homes, workspace, infrastructure, on the land that we own. All the profit we make flows back into Transport for London, but we're absolutely here with a clear social purpose to do what we can to address the challenges that the capital faces.
That's really interesting. I think if we could just probe a little, for anyone listening to this show or just cognizant of TfL and some of the challenges that it's had since the pandemic, that was probably a conscious decision that was made to separate its two funding models. Why? Is it because property's so risky and this is the circumstances that Places for London are in, or does it allow your organisation to go a lot bolder in achieving some of your targets to deliver those tens of thousands of new homes?
It's as simple as when the pandemic struck, TfL lost 95% of its income overnight. We saw numbers on the underground that were lower than we'd seen since Queen Victoria was on the throne. It was important that the transport network was freed up so that those workers who had to get to work were able to do so, minimising the risk of infection for those people. So TfL went from encouraging people to take public transport to asking people, other than those who absolutely had to stay off it. Now, that, of course, imposed a immediate, significant financial burden on the organisation. It had to go through a long period in which it had no certainty of funding whatsoever. I think the shortest that TfL had was a funding deal that lasted 2 weeks. Now, in the context of running TfL's transport network, that's pretty much an impossible task.
Or a property portfolio as big as the one that
you have. So from a property point of view, we're kind of faced because TfL barely had enough money to run a transport network, certainly didn't have the money to invest in property. So it's a fairly stark choice, really. It was, do we have a fire sale of assets at the worst possible time, or do we say, actually, in the midst of all this, there's an opportunity here to do something innovative, which is creating a commercial property company that takes no money from TfL, is able actually to plan long term because we're not dependent on public sector funding. So actually offers the ability to do more, be more strategic, plan longer term, knowing that all the money that we make flows back into the transport network, but we're not diverting any funding whatsoever from the core purpose of TfL, which is transport. Transport for London agreed to all that. City Hall agreed to it. The then government agreed to it. I think it has been seen to be a success. And I certainly think that we're in a much, much better position now as a consequence of the decisions made at that time.
I imagine in operating in such an environment that you are essentially set up by the government, I would have thought. How are you squaring one direction that was set by the mayor's office and then also working national government? I guess I could bring in Mark here. Essentially, my question is, who is setting your political ambitions? You've got half of those tens of thousands of homes that you wish to deliver will be affordable. Is that a political ambition, or is that an ambition based on the need that London has?
I mean, I think regardless of who the government is, I think it's clear what the housing crisis is. So for us, in terms of a political direction, I think the challenges London faces are clear regardless of who's in power. I think we're very proud of the fact that we're part of the GLA family, and we work closely with not only the mayor but the deputy mayors, both for transport and housing, to make sure we're kind of aligning ourselves with that agenda. I suppose we're at a rare window now where we have kind of
synergy, if you will.
Yeah, amongst government and the GLA, and that's certainly helpful. But I think as a public body, we have to be adaptable to whatever those winds change, and so therefore, I think, as I said, I don't think the ambitions or the challenges, should I say, that we face necessarily change, because I think everyone's clear on what the challenges for London are.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we don't see affordable housing as something that's imposed on us. It's something that, as a major London landowner, we have to recognise the challenges that this city faces. We all know, the stats about, on average, one child in every classroom in temporary accommodation. I think for me, for Mark, for everyone in the team, part of the reason why we're here is because we want to address those things, not because we're told to, but because we're in a very privileged position to be able to do something meaningful to address the challenges that this city has.
I'm going to zoom in to some of your flagship projects, but just to kind of stress on this point a little, it's more because a lot of my clients and lots of investors probably look to you for certainty. And I guess while you may have a kind of overarching political direction that you're following, I guess it's what is the message to some investors or those who are looking to you to think, will your targets change? Will your ambitions change? Will your mission change? What would your message be to them?
For as long as I'm here, the targets won't change. As the person who has led Places for London, I'm absolutely clear about the fact that our job is to understand and address the challenges in the round that this city faces. And, ultimately, we're talking about building homes, workspace, infrastructure, amenity around the public transport network in London. I mean, that's as good a portfolio as you'll find pretty much anywhere in the world. For me, something that absolutely goes alongside the opportunity of this job is the responsibility of recognising and meeting the challenges, partly on a sort of pan-London basis, but it's also about recognising that London is, a whole patchwork of individual villages and towns and cities. So the right answer for Cockfosters isn't the same as the right answer for Elscote or South Kent or Morden.
We will certainly
get
into those and absolutely navigating that. But
I think just to pick up on the point about the target, so one other thing it's worth thinking about from if you're thinking from the built environment community looking at us, is that I suppose we're ambitious in the sense of the targets that are set out, but we're also ambitious in the sense that we're alive to the fact that we are uniquely placed in terms of our land holding. So there's other opportunities to solve some of other London's problems. So we're not. So at the moment, Graeme and I are talking to the NHS. Obviously, like you mentioned in your intro, the work with Network Rail and stuff like that. So wherever we can look to use our land to solve the wider issues London face, rather than just a housing crisis, I think we're alive to that as well. So I think we're uniquely placed in that sense.
Can I make one other point that I'm legally bound to make?
These are your this is time for you guys, but please, the disclaimer.
We're also here to make money for Transport for London. So we have a target return, 7.5%. That's what we have to make. And that flows back to Transport for London to invest in the transport network. So all the good things that we do, we're proud of that. We're ambitious. We also have to recognise these are public assets. TfL needs long-term investment, and one of the strong core reasons for setting up Places for London in the first place is to make sure that we're in a position to optimise the financial return that flows back to our shareholder.
And I think that's a good segue into one of the schemes that you're looking to progress now at Bollo Lane in Acton. Talk us through that development. What is it? What's the vision for it? And how do you hope that reinvestment could potentially improve the lives of people in and around that part of Ealing?
I have many favourite schemes.
He would say that, wouldn't he, Mark?
Yeah.
One of them is Bollo Lane. It's certainly one of the most important schemes. I should also begin by saying that over the years I've made a few mistakes. One of the mistakes that I made was assuming that developers could do things better than we could.
Hmm.
Now, we had, not recently, but historically, we've had
That's
some...
I mean, sorry to cut across you there. Is that because of private expertise, or what makes you and your team of specialists able to bring forward a scheme as good as this one?
I thought there was a time when private sector developers would be able to do stuff that we can't, and undoubtedly there are some things that we can't replicate, certainly across the breadth of what we do within places. But Bollo Lane, and Mark was instrumental in this, along with Patricia and the planning team within places. That's a scheme that we got planning on ourselves, and it's a better scheme than would have been obtained by any private sector developer. I think that increasingly I understand that actually addressing the challenges that London faces is about adults coming together and sorting stuff. And critical to that are the adults from the public sector, the major landowners working together, yes, of course, with commercial funders, commercial developers, commercial comms and engagement agencies and others. But actually, we've got access to rooms that other people don't. We can sit down and set out a vision for a site like Bollo Lane, which isn't focused on short-term shareholder return. Bollo Lane is 900 homes, an investment in improving the local transport infrastructure. It's 50% affordable housing. You know, it's something that we can feel proud of. It's something that we can get behind. We had very positive engagement from Ealing, very positive engagement from the GLA. You know, we worked collectively with those parties in order to bring forward that scheme. We were then able to take that to market. And Barratt London was successful in the competition. And the other significant part about that was, as well as us getting planning on it ourselves, was the recognition that actually in identifying joint venture partners, the relationship's important and the effort you put into the relationship. So why would you go through all that effort just for one site? So Bollo Lane is the seed site for our West London partnership, and we will end up bringing forward thousands and thousands of homes with Barratt London, taking the relationship, the experience from that site, and then feeding that engine with other sites across West London.
You know, Mark, your career has taken you from political organising, including your time with the former Deputy Labour leader Tom Watson and the Mayor Sadiq Khan. Just touching on that, you mentioned there, Graeme, that you guys have access to people and rooms and perspectives that really help you shape these schemes. I want to, Mark, how's your background helped to influence the way you approach public and engagement and stakeholder relationships, and how does that complement the critical planning expertise that we mentioned Patricia is working on, but also that development expertise that Graeme and the rest of the team bring to the fore?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it won't come as a surprise to you. I tend to look upon all my work as a campaign, whether it's a small campaign or a
and
big
you
campaign.
taught me that, actually, Mark. And for anyone who doesn't know, Mark and I first met when I was 16, knocking on doors in my native Enfield, and he taught me one thing, which is everything's a campaign, really.
Everything is a campaign. So I'm no different from thinking, well, the election's on this date and I'm going to work backwards to the day. I think planning committee's on this date. I'm going to work back from that date and understand what are the key milestones I want to hit. And I think there is always a challenge in as much as you're going to have the kind of NIMBY aspect of the community that we all face, regardless of the scheme, whether you were Sherlock Holmes or not, as it transpires this week. And I think Bollo Lane's a great example where we, like we say in politics, speed kills. So early engagement, like Graeme mentioned, with the local authority, with the GLA, making sure you're having those conversations, that understanding, but making sure that you're mirroring back to community what they want. So Bollo's a great example where you had this like strip, quite an awkward strip of land that TfL owned that runs along kind of the railway line. On the other side, you had Acton Gardens, which was a kind of a clunky housing estate regeneration. Now, the tempting thing for us would be to come along and just see that as a continuation, to stick a load more houses there, let it mirror what's across the road, and have a scheme that would kind of that fit that parcel. But as an organisation, we didn't want to do that. And as Graeme said, it's credit to the planners of the team that actually they really looked upon it as a fresh approach, and they reimagined the kind of stretch of road down Bollo Lane itself, widened the path, started creating some kind of community back offers in that kind of way. And that's before we started worrying too much about the buildings. And straight away then the community say, okay, I live here, I'm a resident here, and this is also for me, rather than going, oh, that's something that's being built, it won't benefit me. And that was really, really important, really understanding that kind of what the community needed and being able to deliver that. And then likewise with the design of the buildings, I appreciate design's a subjective thing, and I'm all for trying to get that out of the planning system, but equally to come along with ideas for buildings that were different from each other, even within the scheme, as well as those across the road, it gave it a real stamp of independence and approval, and I think that really helped with the process.
Now, I know this from my relationship with lots of my clients, that it can often feel that the comms and political engagement people are a bit of a burden, because they're always finding new ways of shaping the scheme that may be under some financial pressures or viability pressures. I wonder, how did the work that Mark did in going in really early, and the early conversations that you were having with the local authority and trying to just shape Bollo Lane, did you find that the feedback that he was giving you was actually quite helpful in finally shaping Bollo Lane into what it is today?
It was not just useful, but absolutely essential. I mean, again, we are. It sounds trite, but we're here to serve. We're here to deliver what it is that local communities want. And if Mark is having early engagement and understanding directly locally what is it that this scheme needs to look and feel like, then of course we're going to respond to it. This can't work if we sit in an office in central London and just, take a cookie cutter approach to what we're going to be doing across London. It has to begin with what's the context, what's the need. And the more we understand that, the more likely we are to secure planning. But it's even then not simply about getting planning. Of course, it's about building something that's going to stand the test of time. And I'm resolutely of the view that if you do the right thing, the commercials will follow. If you take a narrow, short-term commercial point of view, it's not even going to optimize from a purely commercial point of view. You do the right thing and everything else will follow.
You talk about the longevity of schemes there, and I know that sustainability is particularly important, especially in a place like London. Can you explain how you really sought to integrate sustainability into your proposals? And of course, one of the kind of cardinal aspects, and I know this when I'm looking for a new build flat to potentially rent or even move into, that reduction of car usage is essential to the work that you're doing there. What's the thought process behind it? Why is sustainability so key? And what is the mayor's vision for perhaps carless London?
There's a lot to unpack in that. So from a places point of view, we've got a sustainable development framework. So every scheme that we bring forward, there's just under 100 KPIs that we look at. And for those 100 KPIs, we drill into and seek to make sure that we're focused on international leading practice. We're not an organisation that, again, simply looks to meet whatever the minimum policy standards are. We want to do the best. Now, as a consequence of that, as a consequence of the SDF, as we call it, we were ranked by GRESB last year as the most sustainable property developer in the UK. in the top half dozen in Europe. And we're proud of that, again, not simply from a awards point of view, because it recognises the effort that we put into making sure that what we're doing is truly sustainable, and, for example, the costs that our residents will incur long term from energy, which is obviously increasingly expensive and increasingly important, we are thinking about it from our long term residents' point of view. We're also, as an organisation, part of Transport for London. There's a Mayor's Transport Strategy, and that sets ambitious targets in terms of sustainable modes of transport. Combining those two, within Places for London, we operate TfL 75 car parks across London. Now, those car parks generate significant ongoing revenue for us, but ultimately, as the person who's responsible for them, well, there is a role for car parking around transport hubs in London. But certainly when I was thinking about and when we were looking at some of those outlying car parks, the majority of people using them live well outside London.
Yeah, that's the thing that's always struck me. And I remember doing a bit of work on the Cockfosters station, which, for those who don't know, it's in the northwestern end of Enfield. Some people are travelling as far as Cambridge, Peterborough, even further, just to get into work. And I guess I drive, but that seems like a long way for one to travel that's not even utilised by the locals.
Yeah. So, I get that this is contentious. It's probably...
Oh, we'll get into it. My next question is on Cockfosters and Honest Grove, but I'll let you finish.
It's contentious. I know it's contentious. One of the most contentious things that we do. But I firmly believe that as an organisation that owns the assets we do, particularly around stations, we should be striving to maximise the benefit for London as a consequence of every square foot that we own. And from the individuals who drive those long distances, driving past multiple network rail stations in order to come into the end of the tube network. Now, I use the tube network every day. I understand why for some people it might be cheaper, it might be more convenient, but ultimately, us encouraging people to drive longer with the congestion impacts, the air quality impacts, the carbon impacts of that, you won't be surprised to know that I think that building homes, particularly affordable homes, in the most sustainable location, immediately next to the transport network, makes a hell of a lot more sense than encouraging people to drive those long distances.
It does, and I have to say I'm a keen car driver and a big advocate, but I think that there is a rationale there, and it makes sense, frankly. And going into Cockfosters and Honest Grove that have both been controversial, I think it's fair to say. What were some of the specific challenges? A question to you both, and I'll probably bring in Mark first. What were the specific challenges to those two schemes that they faced in planning and public perception? And how were you squaring those holes and making the argument to those who didn't quite understand the need to build new homes on those car parks?
Yeah, I think it's a mind shift. I think it's there's no one better in London to kind of meet this challenge than us. We own the land in and around the station, so we have to be the drivers of this kind of the changing mindset in terms of how we operate, how we get around our city. And I think you're right. We do a car park survey. We've done them wherever. We look to kind of meet this challenge head on, and it's outstanding. Like where I live in Redbridge, we had the same thing. We have people driving in from Essex, wherever. Obviously, Cockfosters I know quite well from previous life. And yeah, the people are driving an awful long way, but I think it's about reassuring the kind of local politicians. These aren't your electorates that are driving here to park. These are people that are driving in. They're not going to be, we've got to help move them on to other more sustainable forms of transport. And it is difficult. It's difficult because people are used to their cars, they're driving. It's all wrapped up in people's sense of independence and getting around and stuff like that. And it feels like you're taking them away. But unfortunately, when you look back in 15, 20, 30 years' time, you'll know this was the right decision. But it just takes time to evolve, and people need to get their mind around the concept. And I think as well, the transport system has to therefore meet their needs as well. It's no good taking people's cars away and then they arrive at the station and there's not enough trains, or they're not clean, they're not efficient. And I think that we're alive to that as well, and therefore, like Graeme said at the beginning, it's our job to finance that transport network. They go hand in hand. That the extra revenue then creates a better transport system. So it's not quite necessarily a hurdle to get over that people necessarily thought it was. But again, yeah, I don't think there was any challenges in terms of the process that wasn't, as you would expect any kind of scheme in this city, in terms of people not liking development, high housing mix, all of those kind of same challenges that we always have, other than the fact that, like you say, all those people are now going to park on my street, they're going to park in my roads, you're moving the problem further a lot of white and stuff like that. But what has proven been the case in Black Horse Road, and where there was a car park before, is actually once that car park's closed and people find alternate transport methods, they don't go back. So even if you reopen the car park, people then don't go back to driving, because by that point they're used to catching a train from Hertford or Stevenage or wherever they've come from. So it's not dissimilar to debates around smoking or wearing a seatbelt and stuff like that. Over time, people get used to the change, but you have to be the one that drives it. And I appreciate it's not easy in the first instance.
Indeed. And I think what would be interesting to understand is how... Could you give me any examples of any proposals that you've worked on in which you successfully argued, and it's been a perhaps smoother ride through the planning process, around the benefits to the new homes, that the intrinsic social value in bringing forward those new homes, and any carrots or so, any incentives that you've laid in place, the narrative that you've shared have brought some naysayers along with you?
I'm struggling to think of any that have been straightforward. And I'm not sure it should be. I mean, ultimately, we're introducing change, significant change to local areas. I, like you sit through many conferences in which people talk about how the planning system has to change. It's not perfect, but I'm really very happy to work with it as it is. We're held to a high standard, but that feels right to me. As a major strategic landowner that wants to invest in London, it's right and proper that there should be a mechanism to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And people get, understandably, very emotional about it. The only way in which we can deal with that is set out the data, set out the facts, set out a vision for, London as it needs to evolve. And I'm proud of the work that the team does. I think we've got an increasingly strong team that is able to work with partners across London to set out what it is that we're seeking to achieve on a local level as well as a pan-London level. And remember, of course, that on every scheme we are delivering substantial affordable housing, affordable workspace. We're investing in local communities. We're investing in skills. We're about to train our 10,000th person in construction skills.
Wow.
Because we know that we've got literally decades of development on land that we own. So why wouldn't we invest to make sure that people in London get the training, the opportunity in order to take advantage of that work that we're helping to create. So we're nothing if not focused on doing the right thing. And of course, we'll always look, Arnos Grove, Cockfosters, Bollo Lane and everywhere else, to understanding what are those local transport improvements that we can make at the same time as setting out clearly that all the profit that we make gets reinvested in the transport network. So I think we've got as good a case as anyone. That doesn't mean that we get anything other than being held to a high standard, but that's not something that I struggle with.
I think the tangible transport improvements is a really important point that Graeme makes, and the fact that our schemes can help unlock issues around step-free access and stuff like that. But I think a really good example, Graeme, if you agree, of where our development has had massive impact, much wider,
I wonder
would
if you
be...
touch on any kind of placemaking examples.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm going to come on to. Barkingside's a cracking example where we solved so many problems in that area just by our development. Not only did we tackle the housing crisis by bringing forward a fully 100% affordable scheme. Anyone that knows the area, you come out of Barkingside, you'd be greeted by a builder's yard. Very, very narrow street, poorly lit and stuff like that, beyond the kind of reach of TfL in that sense. However, now you're opening up to a massive forecourt, much better lit. It's not a builder's yard, it's houses, so dramatically that means there's more people around.
Natural surveillance is always a phrase that kicks in when you...
Exactly. And that, so I'm tremendously proud of the work there, because it's completely changed the arrival. We hear that word a lot in the built environment, the arrival of when you come out of Barkingside station, and the whole place feels safer, it feels better, and I feel like that. What a fantastic scheme that gives so much back to the community.
Absolutely. And, it's one where it'd have been quite easy would have probably made more money just bringing it forward as a industrial site. But again, you're thinking you've got land
Where's the social good there?
immediately adjacent to the transport network, and bringing forward 98, 100% affordable units next to the transport network is, for me, it's very easy to be blasé about this stuff. You spend a lot of time looking at spreadsheets, but ultimately what we're doing is giving thousands, tens of thousands of people ultimately a front door, a roof over their head, giving people the single most important thing to change people's life chances. Why wouldn't you try and do that to the maximum extent you can?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with what Graeme said. I think Graham's done a tremendous amount of work in terms of making sure that we have dedicated members of the team. Lucy Attlee in our job does a fantastic job of the play spaces for women and young girls and stuff like that. So it's really noble that real thought and consideration goes into everything we do. It's really important.
Can I just build on that, just because I think, again, I know we're not the only people who do it, but for us it's absolutely
You
core.
seem to be doing it really well. And it's something that I've been following so much, and why I've invited you on, because it's a real story to tell.
Yeah. For us, it's always about not simply thinking within the red line of what it is that we own. As an organisation that's wholly owned by TfL, we're acutely aware of the fact that for people who are moving into one of our developments, their front door effectively starts on the platform of the station. So, of course, when thinking about placemaking, when thinking about safety, we're going to think about something that goes beyond the development itself. And Lucy, as Mark, rightly highlights, continues to do a fantastic job. Just making sure that we're all held to account, so that the quality of what we bring forward will, ultimately serve the people who live and work on our developments, and certainly ultimately ensure that those developments stand the test of time.
And I think that's a good segue into the concept that we've been discussing here, which, when you recall, we penned a joint article for the Fabian Society, although it's the Local Government and Housing Member Policy Group, which is always a good acronym. But it was around the success of some international examples like New Zealand, in concentrating development around things that they refer to as station development zones. Talking about working within the red lines, we live in a great country, and it has a phenomenal history of building incredible things, but it is a very complex system to navigate. I wonder if there are any international examples or similar approaches that you could think of that London could benefit from, and that places for London are actively and practically trying to push that our regional and national government implement.
I spend as much time as I can, which still isn't enough, looking to see what's happening elsewhere in the world. And that's both learning from others and sharing with others what it is that we're up to. So I, for example, working with the FCDO, went to Kenya for a week recently, sharing with the Kenyan government what it is we've done within Places for London and the benefits as we see them of doing development around stations and the sorts of infrastructure that it takes to make that happen. I've had calls recently with colleagues from Toronto, Hong Kong, Singapore, Sydney. The answer, as you would expect, is there isn't any one city that solved this. We obviously looked at the zoning in New Zealand, and on the face of it, the significant success that has had, both in terms of unlocking development and then directly improving access to housing. But I haven't seen any one thing that you would just want to pick up and drop on London. But I think it's definitely beholden on us and the industry more broadly not to sit back and imagine that within London or within the UK we've got all the answers. In fact, even I think one thing that I hold myself to account for is the fact that I spend much more time talking to other cities around the rest of the world than I do other cities elsewhere in the UK. I try to when I can, but I think we could definitely do more learning from each other across the UK. And it's not about endeavouring to drop a solution like Places for London elsewhere. It's about understanding what's the local context, what's the local needs, and how can we all learn from each other in terms of we'll all get some things right, we'll get some things wrong, but the more we share, the more successful jointly, ultimately, we will end up being.
I don't think it would be a surprise, though, when you say, Graeme, to see the Places kind of model start rolling out in other cities, especially as devolution kind of moves up the political spectrum even more, and you see the kind of like the work Andy Burnham's done in Manchester and stuff like that. It seems like a natural successor.
Yes. The only reason for me pausing is, as someone who's been immersed in this for a decade, there is nothing that we've done that to me isn't obvious, logical, sensible.
But you would say that, though, Graeme. You guys clearly have. You clearly found a formula of building homes, and like you said, there's some schemes that could make TfL and kind of wider public purse a lot better, but you're still looking at where there's social good and able to bring down the cost of housing. I think to the Auckland example that you were touching on, what made that unique was it was a clear example of increasing supply and seeing a slowing down of cost of housing, both for rent and for people buying. So I think to Mark's point, what lessons in your experience in your time, Places for London and elsewhere, have you seen real tangible examples of where you can bring down the cost of housing in a sustainable way, but one that improves access for people who would otherwise afford it?
I cannot claim that even if we develop out all of Places for London's estate, that we'll by ourselves be able to bring down the cost of housing. What I can absolutely say is that in particular, if the rest of the public sector if we can collectively sort ourselves out. I mentioned earlier the adults in the room. There are a relatively small number, major landowners, largely in the public sector, who I am keen work ever more closely together. Each of us thinks beyond the red line of what we own. Each of us recognises that you can't solve every problem at every site, but you can make money on some locations that helps to offset higher social value, higher levels of affordable housing elsewhere. But everywhere has to work. Everywhere has to be a mix. Everywhere has to be focused on what's the right solution for that location, but also to have the ability to stand back and then say that in the context of a challenging economic environment in which we know, we've got a spending review coming up, but we know there's not going to be all the money that we need to address housing. We know there's not going to be all the money that we need to address transport infrastructure or healthcare infrastructure. There's then, I think, a moral obligation for us as major public sector landowners to work with commercial partners in order to maximise the wider public benefit that we can deliver on the land that we own. And the more we do that in a joined up way, the more we do that in a long-term focused, ambitious way, the more likely we are to be a success. And there's a quote that I think Professor Greg Clark has used before about London is a negotiated city. I think that
that's a good one.
I don't think this is something that's going to be imposed on us. I think this is about us, City Hall, boroughs, Network Rail, other parties working collectively together with commercial developers in order to get this done.
Thank you. And Mark, you touched on this. What conversations are being had? Mind you, I know that you work across the political spectrum, and it's not just those in the national government or the regional government. Do you think we know we're not getting more money, but what conversations are happening at the moment to really accelerate house building, and what creative thinking are you hearing about that are being proposed in some of these white papers to really accelerate and catalyse the housing that we need?
I mean, it's fundamentally about the levers the government can pull. It doesn't necessarily need to be about money in the first instance. Appreciate money would make a lot of the problems go away, but where the money doesn't exist, there are levers that could be pulled through the planning process. And I'm pretty sure everyone who's listening to this, certainly listening to this for the length of time we've been chatting, will appreciate the process that's holding up current applications and the 40 odd weeks it's taken, etc., etc. But I think that what I think there is a risk that the conversation at times focuses too much on fairness in the market, and actually what brings the price down is demand fundamentally. So if we can get stuff built, it's not on us to be the sole provider of the solution, but we can certainly be part of the solution, and we're keen to do that. But until we manage to get the homes built, then we're not going to actually be able to have a real grown-up conversation around how you solve the wider housing market. So I think there is a growing need for some of the kind of the levers around government to be pulled that makes the process easier. I appreciate that's not without fix. You still need manpower, etc., in terms of processing applications, and certainly anything around safety should not be compromised by an inch. So I think that they're listening and speaking to senior politicians and stuff. It's clear that that work's being done to make sure the process is even if the money's not necessary at the moment, to find the kind of quick solution.
Can I just say that the single most helpful thing that this government did on coming in, which is talking positively about the fact that homes need to be built.
The mood music is so important.
Yes.
That's something I've learned, certainly in the private sector. If there's no confidence in the market, then any story that you tell will just be hit back with doubts and worries.
Yeah, not least because it gives voice to those people who often will not have the time to turn up to a planning committee or an engagement event. We know that those people who are more time rich, we know that those people who have a home are more likely to turn up to object. Those people who are trying to juggle 2 or 3 jobs in order to get onto the housing ladder are much less likely to be able to turn up. I think just hearing it said loudly and clearly that we need to build more homes is extraordinarily helpful, I think, for all of us who are in this industry. You mentioned Cockfosters and Arnos Grove. We've had examples there and elsewhere where local MPs, thankfully no longer MPs, have come out squarely against the notion that we need to build homes. Just getting the understanding that homes need to be built. We're very, very happy to engage on the massing, design, all of that stuff. We're happy to engage with. It's difficult to engage with someone who doesn't even recognise that we need homes.
One interesting thing, going back to the Bollo example, actually, you touch upon, it felt to me a little, because some of the Bollo consultations took place during the pandemic, so I had to quickly rethink how we would do it. And
Webinars and
exactly the church hall boards up, and it feels sadly to me a little bit as a comm sector within the built environment is that we've almost just gone back to that.
Yeah,
and
well, some of us have.
And I just feel like if you're going to really engage, and if you're really going to speak to the people that need the houses in the future, invest in the community in the future, not just the people that are trying to pull up the ladder, how do you speak to those people? And it makes me sad almost when I think about we made massive strides at Bollo because we had to think about how we consolidate. So we did it in lots of different ways, like you say, using webinars, using different forms of technology and stuff like that. And now I feel like we've almost gone back to the point where we're renting out a church hall and those people are coming up. And I think something that we're keen to do at places to make sure that we are really doing everything we can to make sure as many people are engaged as possible when we go through these processes.
And in closing, I think there is a forward look here. And I'll ask you both questions individually as we look ahead. Mark, I'll start with you. I think after 5 years in the role, what have you found to be the most valuable lessons in terms of community engagement? I know you touched on it there. But what is the future? What does the future look like for community engagement and communication? And how will those lessons help you shape your future strategies to really get to those who are less likely to engage? A cross section. I know it's a big question, but
no. I mean, look, the first rule of politics is learn how to count. So I can't lie. My concern is how many people are going to vote yes on the planning committee, and I'd be being disingenuous if I said that wasn't a concern of mine. And then in my previous life, obviously, I would spend hours and hours setting Selbyk Hall or Broad House or whatever to take you back to Enfield, pouring over demographic data and how to best target people. Like, I think the solution is, in my 5-year experience, is getting the compromise in the room. And what I mean by that is the NIMBYs and the people who want the development, where you can, help them both understand the compromises that need to come about. Okay, so where you've got, and to be fair to Dan Tomlinson, he's done a terrific job of this in High Barnet. You have to let everyone understand that we need to develop these homes. That's a given. They're not going to be developed. But getting everyone in a room together, helping understand the challenges, that the fact that the height pays for particularly excellent playground, or you can have less of that, but you need the certain height. All of those kind of challenges. No one believes you if it's just the developer saying it. Everyone believes you're being disingenuous. Let the two groups talk to each other. And I think where possible, you want to create an environment for that debate. You want to create an environment of discussion and let them people understand each other's needs, each other's concerns, and then come to a solution that way. That's what I think the future is for engagement.
The answer can't always be no.
Yeah.
And it's, what does yes look like? And what does yes
exactly.
look like? Because we are going to progress. And ultimately, the thing that always strikes me, I've delivered leaflets across the south of England, but also across the country, is I will come up against a new build housing development, and maybe a man or woman will come out of their door and ask me what I'm doing, and I'll tell them that it's about a scheme that I'm working on next door. And the immediate response is, oh, well, I don't want new housing. Yeah. And I sometimes have to remind people that you're stood in one just there. So
absolutely.
How do you ensure the answer isn't always no? And what does a compromise like that really look like?
Yeah. And that has to come from the people that live around them, that they reflect each other rather than us who have turned up and then move back to, or get on the train back to as nearer to West Ham as we're allowed to live.
I knew he was going to get West Ham referencing at some point. And Graeme, to close with you, we haven't really touched much on private partnerships or partnerships that Places for London may touch on. I know that you've spoken about Barrett a bit earlier. Looking ahead, what is next for Places for London? Is it that? And are there any particular projects or locations that you're excited about? And what's your kind of closing message? I'm going to give you a few minutes, if you will, for our listeners who've taken the time to listen to us whine on.
Well done for anyone who's lasted out this long. The next 12 months, by a distance, the most important within Places for London. By a distance, the busiest. Bear with me just whilst I run through for a minute what we're doing this year, and then I'll talk about the future. So we've got schemes that will be completing Fenwick, at Barkingside, next phase of Wembley Park. We will be starting at the Bollo Lane, the main site there. We will be going in for planning for Edgware, 3,365 homes, Earls Court, 4,000 homes. We'll be going in for planning at High Barnet, 300 homes. Woolwich, OSD, 500 homes. We'll be continuing with our commercial office scheme above Bank Station, which has just started. At 10 King William Street, we'll be starting on site at our next commercial office at Paddington. We'll be starting our first student scheme at Southwark. We'll have completed our first ultra-rapid electric vehicle charging hub at Hatton Cross. That's going to be the first of 65. We will be completing the asset management investment, significant investment, just down the road at Whitechapel. We'll be bringing forward reconditioned arches. Will look fantastic at Kilburn. Major schemes also at Wood Lane, at Baker Street. You know, we're investing hundreds of millions of pounds across London, bringing forward literally dozens of schemes that will transform the city for decades to come, doing everything that I've said in terms of social value, affordable housing, local investment, community engagement. We'll also be bringing forward with Network Rail opportunities with them. Network Rail own 1.5 times what we do in London alone. Brilliant opportunities working with them at places like Waterloo, Victoria, Woolwich Town Centre and elsewhere. And for me, the future is everything that we're talking about from a Places point of view. We can look over the fence and see what the real opportunity here is if the public sector gets itself together, gets organised, works in a more ambitious, strategic, collaborative way. Working with commercial partners, we're up to nine joint ventures. Increasingly, those are multi-site, multi-decade joint ventures. I think, I said earlier, I've made lots of mistakes, but we've learned a lot as well. And we're very happy to work with anyone who shares the values we've got, the ambitions that we've got for making this city a better place to live and to work. And whether those people are in the private sector, the public sector, I will sit down at any stage with anyone who wants to work with us to make all of this happen.
That's an incredible outro, I have to say. And, and actually, very best of luck with the student schemes, I have to say, and actually some of the low lines that you've talked about, because I know when it comes to students, actually, I think one of the most compelling arguments is it will free up, especially in inner cities, more traditional forms of housing are been turned into HMOs, which it's a model that works for some people, but for others, and particularly those who are having to move out of London with the people place planning crisis that we're facing, hopefully some more family-sized housing will be able to let or buy. And I think lastly, to both of you, in a sentence, what drives you about the impact, about the work that you're doing at Places for London? And again, what's your closing message about the future of what London can be?
I'm tremendously proud to work for Places. I'm tremendously proud to be part of the TfL family. I guess the fact that we can solve or help solve so many of the problems that we face as a city. I'm immensely proud of being from East London. I emphasise the word East there, but I am to every day to come into work and to think about the challenges that we face as a city and play a role in help solving them. Yeah, it's more than enough motivation to be in at 9 o'clock every morning.
Graeme.
I was brought up in Edinburgh, spent 10 years living in Bristol. I'm now in London. I can't imagine being anywhere else. London is just...
It's the greatest city on earth.
For me, exactly. Anywhere else would feel like a step down. We've got the ability to shape London, make London a better place. I have got one of the best jobs in this city. Like Mark, incredibly proud of what it is that we're doing. London's best days are ahead, and we want to work with people who want to make that happen.
Thank you so much. And having listed all of those, honestly, I don't know how you have so much time in the day, but particularly to spend it here with us. So that is all we have time for on this episode of the Better Places podcast. And a huge thank you to Graeme and to Mark for taking the time for such an open and insightful discussion. It's clear that Places for London are at the forefront of rethinking how we can make the most of the public land that we have available to build and to create vibrant communities and support a more sustainable future for London. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and don't forget to follow and subscribe on your favourite platforms. We'll be back soon with more conversations on the intersection of politics, planning and placemaking here in the capital. And you may well see my face again here in this lovely studio in Whitechapel. So until next time, I'm Siddo Dwyer. Thank you for listening.